you're going all out in terms of this electoral fraud and so forth. You are, in a sense, like you are the leading person coming to this electoral fraud issues and whatever. So with all this rally going on, okay, I would like to ask you, how does this particular expose that you're making is actually supplementing the rallies, in order to create awareness in terms of electoral fraud?
Well, I think generally people acknowledge and accept that our electoral system is not free and fair. In a few surveys done even before the last general elections, almost 80% people believe that the electoral system is not free and fair. So it's not as if we had to convince people about our cause. People more or less are aware of it. The rally becomes important after the general election because there was an outcry by the public and discuss about what I think the widespread fraud reported all over the country. So you have to manage both. I mean, you have to manage the public sentiment. You cannot allow that outcry to be pented up. You know, it has to be at least manifested in a healthy manner, and that's why I think that energy translated into all this huge gathering. But on top of that, people also realize that in Malaysia, any reform or any change will not take place without huge public pressure. If you allow Barisan Nasional to come to their sense, or for SPR to acknowledge the need for reform, I don't think people have much hope for that to happen on its own. So it has to come with public rallies, because these public rallies actually is a clear proof to everyone that electoral reform is a very important and sentimental subject to the hearts of millions of Malaysians. So that's why all these come together, and it has to be complementary to each other. And I've repeated this all the time. That's why we have to fight for electoral reform on the streets. When I say on the streets, I don't mean bringing down government undemocratically. I mean that we have to continue capturing people's mind through public rallies and through awareness, so that people actually, because ceramah and public rallies are important, especially to the young, because it suits their trend and needs. So it's one of the most effective ways of actually educating the young about our electoral system. We are fighting in the court, and we are not just the legal court, but also the courts of public opinion. Hence, we will continue to make expose, and we will continue to fight in Parliament. So at the end of the day, just like any other type of reforms that we have been fighting before, the human rights, repeal of ISA, it has to be carried out simultaneously on different fronts. Only that you can exert enough pressure on Barisan Nasional for them to accept and to move forward towards reform.
Okay, coming back to this electoral fraud and everything, it seems like the real enemy is not the Barisan Nasional government itself. It's the SPR itself. They are the huge stumbling block, and with like people like Wan Ahmad giving statements. I'm sure you've read FMD. The statements he's been giving is he's like speaking like a pro-government person. So how do you deal with an electoral system? I mean, electoral body that's supposed to be independent but acting pro-government. How do you go against such a powerful institution?
You're right. I mean, of course, the real culprit has always been BN. We know for a fact that to fight Sabah and Sarawak, people always talk about, we should go to the rural Malays and so on, and rural Bumiputra. The biggest stumbling block, for example, to break through in Sabah, Sarawak and the rural area is the fact there is rampant vote buying. Because the threshold level in rural area is a lot lower, meaning that with 100 ringgit, people felt indebted enough to change their votes and stay with BN. So unless SPR is very firm about election law, and when I say election law, I mean the whole sets of it about caretaker government, about the wider definition of vote buying. So unless SPR becomes a fair referee to that, we are facing, not just the massive vote buying, but also a commission that is dedicated to justifying every single wrong act and fraud that Barisan Nasional has committed. So that's why after the last general election, at least some of us in PKR, we came to that consensus and resignation to the fact that as much as BN is the real culprit, it's a step process, and you have to focus all efforts for the time being to get rid of the current SPR so that the new set of commissioners will be impartial and will carry out their constitutional duty fairly. And that's why, as you pointed out, there seems to be a shift in the last few weeks that we are focusing on SPR, because I think I personally realize, and I always repeat that, is that if you don't have a fair election commission, there is really no point going into election. And that is a very dangerous route for Malaysians to contemplate, because the more and more people lose hope and confidence in the election commission, means more and more people lose faith and hope in the democratic electoral system. And that can only mean danger in the future. And there's so much that political parties like Pakatan Rakyat parties can do to persuade our younger members. And we do have a lot larger younger support base. And for that, I think that's why it is also a demand by the public that we focus on SPR to get rid of the current crop of commissioners and bring back EC to what constitutionally defined as their impartial role in making sure that the electoral system in this country can garner the support and confidence of the public.
So, coming back to EC, Wan Ahmad, if you have noticed that the chairman himself has been very quiet since the election. Wan Ahmad is the one making a lot of statements, and a lot of his statements are very much he sounds like a politician. So what is your comment in regards to whatever he's saying? Like, for example, yesterday he gave a statement saying that opposition is actually confusing or the urban folks and so on and so forth. So what is your take on whatever Wan Ahmad is saying? Do you think his conduct himself can be questioned judging from his statements?
In other countries, I think he would have been impeached by now. And because EC commissioners cannot be removed unless a tribunal is set. So I'm very confident in other countries he would have been subjected to a tribunal to impeach and remove him. His personal conduct, on top of the irregularities and incompetence of SPR as a whole, what is most damaging is that his personal conduct is actually a liability to SPR. And that's why I pity to a certain extent the chairman's position, because I'm sure he's looking at Wan Ahmad and he knows that whatever Wan Ahmad is saying is making it difficult for SPR to concentrate on their job and to get back whatever goodwill left from the public of its independence and professionalism. So from whatever a few things he has been acting before, during and after the general election, there's enough ground to me personally, there's enough ground for a tribunal to be set to remove him, because Wan Ahmad as a person is a liability to SPR, and unless you remove people like Wan Ahmad, forever SPR will be tainted with views that it is nothing more than a lackey for UMNO and Barisan Nasional to justify fraud in the last in elections.
Again, on this electoral fraud thing, like for example, when the Indelible fiasco turned up, washable within a few hours and everything. At that particular juncture, one of I came up with few reasons. He said because of prayers and all that kind of stuff. Okay. Do you think? I mean, of course, it's academic. The question is academic. But do you think when the Indelible ink problem came about, do you think that the SPL at that particular time, the least they should have done is to halt the electoral process first before and investigate what's happening with the Indelible ink, replace it before they continue with the election?
Sure, you're right. I mean, there's a gap of between 5 days between the incidents when Indelible ink was reported to be faulty. Whether it was pre-planned like that, I think it will be the subject of a few things and a few investigation. And then you are right when you say that the least they could have done is to demonstrate to the public that they went all out to rectify the problem, because the worry about Indelible ink and therefore the outcry all this while is the existence of phantom voters. So even if they don't want to act on Indelible ink, at least they could have gone all out to prove to the public and that the voters' roll is actually clean. And on that day, a lot of things could have been done when cases were reported nationwide about people who could not vote because someone else voted. Even at that point, on the polling day, it's still there was still time for them to act, even to suspend election and so on, when there was widespread reports. But all along, all these issues are not new. In fact, Indelible ink is almost secondary to the real issue of suspect electoral roll. Even if they were to claim after this that Indelible ink was a mistake but not pre-planned, that means that it was incompetence on their part for getting a low quality ink. That still does not justify the fact that they had been extremely defensive on electoral roll and they refused to remove names. And in Sabah, there were about 56,000 dubious names. And this is part of the testimony to the Royal Commission of Inquiry that there are still 56,000 dubious names included in the electoral roll. They could have done all this. And if they had done this 2-3 years ago, cleaning up, working with us, so that people actually have faith in the electoral roll, if there was a genuine mistake in the Indelible ink because of the quality, I think people would not jump the way we have reacted so far. It is because once you put all this all together, it gives the impression, and it's very convincing, that everything is pre-planned and put in place to allow for phantom voters to continue. And Indelible ink was just a sweet promise given to Bersih and Pakatan and the Rakyat, at least to assuage the anger that were building up because they were not honest about electoral roll. And true enough, when it was only discovered during the election campaigning period, then SPR will always plead there's nothing much we could do and therefore we had to go. And because what is important at that point is to get Barisan Nasional to come back to power first and face the consequence later. So that's why I think it's fair enough now that SPR is facing the consequence from the public for its failure and complicity, because as you pointed out, there were so many things that could have been done 2-3 years down the line, even without taking into account implementation of Indelible ink.
So, with the election, like you mentioned just now, that you suspect that their main aim is to put Barisan Nasional in power first, and then later on face the consequences later. But the election is done. Barisan Nasional has won with a minority, majority, and everything. So, what's next? I mean, in the sense, like what can be done to pressure EC now? I mean, for them, the job is done. For them, the job is done. You can sit and rest for the next 5 years. So, what can be done in these 5 years to ensure that you have the correct team to lead EC?
I'm a generation born out of public anger. I was a reformasi generation. After 15 years, I'm convinced that with constant focus on frauds, on corruption, on irregularity, on abuse of human rights, we are where we are today because we have consistently fought for it. It just so happened that perhaps electoral reform was not top on the agenda 10 years before. It's about abuse of power, about police abuse, about corruption. Now the whole energy and focus of Pakatan Rakyat and civil society and the younger generation is on electoral reform. And I think Wan Ahmad, Tan Sri Aziz and the whole SPR and Barisan Nasional had severely underestimated the kind of public undercurrents that they will have to face because of the flawed general election this month. So the public support, the public anger is unprecedented. I mean, we were surprised. I mean, I was really surprised looking at Kelana Jaya. I mean, it was only tweeted and Facebook just quietly, and you had that kind of crowd, and it was multiracial, it was young, it was full of energy. This is a crowd to be reckoned with, and this is a crowd, and the cause cannot be ignored. So I think with pure consistent focus on electoral reform, and when everyone starts coming onto the bandwagon to push for it, SPR will have no choice but to accept criticism and move forward towards reform. Of course, our position is that reform can only take place with a complete removal of the existing EC commissioners, and we will work towards that. And let's see whether Barisan Nasional's government in Putrajaya want to risk further erosion of support just to protect 2 or 3 of these people who did not do their job properly in the first place anyway. Or if Najib is sincere about so-called national reconciliation, the national reconciliation or any talk about moving forward must begin with electoral reform, which is which must start with the complete removal of all the existing commissioners. So I think we are getting there. If you ask me personally, I think the campaign is working really well. It's beyond our expectation. And electoral reform, and then I always play by that rule of thumb, if an issue stays for 1 month, that means you've already hit it. The fact that from April until today, this issue about fraud and irregularity in electoral reforms remain as the number 1 issue in the media and public minds, it means that it's not going to go away. And we just have to continue to exert the pressure, and eventually I think the establishment would have to concede that only with reforms that this country can move forward after this.
Coming to the coming to the election petition. You mentioned yesterday that filing an election petition could cost up to $50,000.
Minimum
$50,000 ringgit, and it's tough to file an election petition. Can you explain a little bit why is it tough? Why is it tough, and why is it costing so much? Maybe you can explain.
I've gone through the whole law and all the previous experience, sat down with lawyers after lawyers. I would say that it's almost impossible actually to win an election petition, because the law requires you to provide a proof, the standard of which is nearly beyond human's capacity. I give you an example. There are 3 grounds, for example, for an election petition to be allowed by a court. The first 2 grounds are considered as the general grounds, which is first is general bribery, whereby people or party that contest in the election are caught giving bribery or inducements or intimidation to influence the votes. Okay. The problem with this is that for the petition to even be accepted, not even try though, not even win an election petition, for the petition to be accepted by the court, in your petition during filing, you must prove that sufficient number of people were affected by this act of general bribery, and each single one of them must come forward. That means that in the seats that we lost by 1,700 votes, I have to bring 1,000 people who are willing to do a statutory declaration and police report and say that I so and so accepted so and so, and because of that I switched my votes to BN. Even if you bring these people and they admitted they accepted votes, there are still grounds for your opponent to make objection and say he would have voted for BN in the first place, and therefore your election petition is null and void. The most you can get is about 10 people who are willing to come forward. To get 1,000, 1,500 people, 800 people is an impossibility. And I'm sure when we explain this to the public after this, public will say, why do you have an election petition law in the first place if this is the kind of so-called standard of proof? Okay. Number two, likewise, the other ground for allowing election petition if it goes against the procedures or election laws. This includes all the Borang 14, all the if blackouts or wrong counting and so on, advance votes, ballot boxes tampered with. These are all fall into this non-adherence to election rules and procedure. Again, I have to prove to public that sufficient number of votes were affected by that irregularity that could have turned the results otherwise. For example, if we lost in Balik Pulau by 1,700, we have an evidence of one polling stream where there were 126 extra votes in that polling stream. As far as election petition is concerned, once you file, most probably it will be struck off. On the ground that there's only 126. There's not enough to change the... So, our election petition rules allow and tolerate for discrepancies and irregularities until such point that you hit the critical number that could have turned the results otherwise. So, it's I've been working with Bersih and the lawyers and so on, and that's why historically hardly any election petition ever sees the light of the day in the court for the trial. Usually it is struck off either at filing or during the preliminary objection stage, whereby it's your contesting party will continue to list down all these objections, and usually their objections will be allowed. On the ground, there is not enough to prove that the votes would have gone otherwise. And the third ground for allowing election petition, if a specific conduct of the candidate of his agent of giving money or corruption or bribery. But that means that we have to catch the BN candidate red-handed being given money, and we can prove that the money comes from him, which is impossible, because obviously the candidate themselves don't give money, the agents don't give money. In Penang, for example, money is being given by all these NGOs, and some people allege by the underworld. So when we go and raid and take photographs and videos of places where they were distributing money, we couldn't even find Barisan Nasional logo, because Barisan Nasional allegedly had subcontracted all this to people on the ground. So because of all this requirement of the law, that's why I've maintained all along that I'm not really hopeful that we will be successful in our petition. But it's part of the process to push for electoral reform, and only when we file and only when we go to the public and explain the kind of election petition laws that we have and why it's nearly impossible to get justice from the court because the law is written as such. And I think people, the level of awareness will increase, and we will gather more momentum in pushing for electoral reforms.
In election petition, for example, let's say if you are contesting, let's say for example, the number of phantom voters, does the legislation where the courts are not allowed to scrutinize electoral vote, would that also hamper the election?
Yeah, of course. There was an amendment after 1999 that makes an electoral roll final and cannot be challenged in court. And this is the excuse being used by SPR all along to be complicit in the dubious electoral roll, because they always say that the moment somebody is on the electoral roll, there's nothing they could do about it, and there is nothing anyone can do about it because of the amendments. And they always maintain that so long as you have an IC, then therefore you can be in the electoral roll, whereas the constitution is very clear that only Malaysians can vote. And by Malaysians, it doesn't mean that just because you have an IC, you are Malaysian. You have to satisfy a set of criteria, and the process by which you get your citizenship is also up for scrutiny. So EC has always been hiding behind this so-called amendment. I can't remember what amendment was. I think it's amendment section 9 or something, that supposedly protects electoral roll from being challenged. Now, we've been looking at it carefully. The party will announce maybe in the next few days or sometime early next week that we will set up a special team to be headed by Professor Aziz Bari to look at it again constitutionally and to challenge that amendment to be unconstitutional and ultra-virus to the constitution. And that's why I think BN and SPR is in for a surprise this time around. We are going to turn and scrutinize everything. We will open all the previous discrepancies and amendments being made that have allowed SPR and BN to manipulate elections as they did, and that includes challenging that amendment that allow SPR to so-called tolerate phantom voters and dubious voters in our electoral roll.
But in order to challenge that particular legislation, that legislation you need to take it up to the courts, and the courts needs to rule it as unconstitutional. In order
you will see that happening very soon. You will see that. We have made a decision. I just don't want to jump the gun, but you will hear an announcement either tomorrow or Monday that PKR will challenge that Section 9 amendment, and the team headed by Aziz Bari will look into details of that. So as I say, I think they'll be in for a surprise, because we are going to pull out everything that we have to rectify and fix everything that was wrong that SPR and BN had done in the last 50 years when it comes to our electoral roll.
Okay, I want to push up up the ante a little bit. All these rallies and everything, is it merely to create awareness, or are you guys trying to take it to some other level? I've always felt that, as I say, for us to achieve reform and to achieve something out of this, it has to be concerted efforts at all levels and all avenues. BN does not respond to intellectual argument. SPR may not even understand it. So they only understand one language, which is the people's power. And for the time being, the message and language of people's power is manifested through the huge public rallies that we have demonstrated for the last 3 weeks, because BN knows there is no way that they could pull off something like that. And given the fact that we don't pay, we don't even have publicity, we don't give anything, for hundreds of thousands of people to travel and to walk 6-7 miles just to go for a rally, that means that it's a big issue that people cannot deny. So while we continue to appeal intellectually and with arguments to the public,
it is also important to demonstrate in the form of public pressure through these public rallies, so that BN come to their sense that if they don't respond to this, it will be at the detriment of their electoral support. Because not just people who attend the public rallies, but the public in general are watching. The younger generation, the 18, 19, 20 who did not vote in the last general election are watching. And they will compare the arguments that we put forth. They will compare the videos that we show, all this police report, all the stories that they hear from the elders. If BN does not respond to the huge public rallies, which most of it is participated by the younger population anyway, they risk losing further the younger sets of electorates who will come on board in next 1 or 2 years. And I don't think, while BN may not be interested in any other arguments, they understand the language of electoral support. And that's why we have to continue with the rally, because only with public pressure like that, and that has been proven in the last few years, only with that kind of public pressure, Najib and BN and SPR will come to their sense and say there's nothing that we can do to ignore this anymore. It will get worse, the momentum will gather. If we want to calm things down, we have to sit down and find way forward with the civil society and with Pakatan Rakyat.
Another thing I'd like to check with you is at the end of the year, there's a redelineation process going on. Okay, as far as I understand, you may correct me if I'm wrong here. As far as I understand, if they want to add the number of seats to the parliament, they need to do a constitute two-thirds majority. But if they were to redraw the boundaries without adding to the number of seats, they only need a simple majority.
You're right.
So, do you see this as because with the SPR officials being integrity is being questionable, do you think they're going to redraw the boundaries in a way that's going to favor Barisan, and how are you guys going to oppose this when it only requires simple majority to redraw boundaries without adding the number of seats?
I have no doubt that SPR, or at least the top leadership of SPR, will collude with BN with no shame whatsoever to skew the process, so much so that it will reduce the number of urban and semi-urban seats that have been favouring Pakatan Rakyat, and at the same time they will create more rural seats that most probably will go to Barisan Nasional. And this can be done, as you point out, without even the need for two-thirds. What they will do is that they will combine the urban seats. I may see my seats, Pandan and Ampang, being combined into two with constituency size of 150,000. They will combine, yeah, because Pandan is about 80 and Ampang is about 80, so it can be combined to about 150,000 voters, which is not so much of a big deal, I think, as far as they are concerned, because Kapar is already almost 150,000 anyway. And they will make sure, for example, seats in Johor, seats that they have won in Perak, will be split into two, so the 40,000 constituency size in Johor will be split into 20,000 and 20,000. So constitutionally that's okay. They only require a simple majority, because the total number of constituencies don't change, but the effect of that, it reduces the number of urban and semi-urban seats, and that is being offset by increase in rural size. Some people say, well, I don't, some people argue with me and say, oh, that will be outrageous. People will be too mad about it, and impossible for BN to do it. Don't underestimate them. I have full confidence, if don't fight for it from now, that's exactly what will happen. That's why we, through Black 505, we've made 3 specific demands. One is the complete removal of all the EC commissioners and replacement by a set of people agreed and mutually acceptable by Pakatan Rakyat and civil society. Second one, a re-election in 30 seats if fraud is sufficiently proven. But the third one is concerns redelineation exercise. We want any form of amendment to existing law and redelineation exercise to be suspended until such time that the new sets of commissioners who are seen to be independent and impartial are appointed to remove the current ones. If we allow the current sets of SPR and commissioners to continue, you will see even bigger outrageous act of fraud, whereby I think they will gerrymander so much so that the number of seats in Penang, in Selangor, the urban seats will reduce, and they will add up more rural seats in other areas that will hugely favor them, and that means that we already lost the 14th general election 5 years down the 5 years down the road.
So how do you plan to fight this? How do you plan to fight this? Because this, we can see this coming. How do you plan to fight this?
That's why all the legal challenge, all the public rallies, and all this campaign about police report, all these are meant to bring together the public support for electoral reform, because this can only be fought by public pressure. I know that to many people it sounds very futile, because there's nothing legally that you could do to stop them. They have every power within the law just because of the simple majority to do this. But no government in the world, especially in BN's position now when they only have 47% of the popular vote, no government in the world can ignore continuous public outcry about a specific issue. So with public pressure consistently trained on SPR, and if we gather momentum enough to demand for their resignations, only with the complete removal of the current crop of SPR commissioners that we can stop whatever plans they have, and that we can ensure at least the redelineation exercise is going to be fair to everyone. So I still say that the combined public pressure that we exert now in the media, in parliament, in courts, and especially on the streets, that is the only way left for us to fight the next level of gerrymandering that perhaps is going to take place very soon.